Howdy, howdy, folks. Once again, it is Donnie, and it is time for some Linux in the news. And we're going to focus today on Ubuntu. And, of course, it is April, which means that the Ubuntu people have released a new version of their Ubuntu family of Linux distros, or I should more properly say GNU Linux distros for you purists out there. But anyway, we see here in Distro Watch, we have the whole list of all of the Ubuntu distros that have been released. It is version 17.04. And of course, since this is an odd number year, we are seeing the release of the intermediate distros. The long-term support distros only come out every even numbered year. So that won't be until next April. But anyway, what does this mean? Well, if you're a desktop user, it probably doesn't mean too much. But there are a few improvements, and we'll see the details here in this article here at zdnet.com. Under the hood, this edition of Ubuntu uses the Linux 4.10 kernel. This means it supports the AMD Ryzen and Intel Kaby Lake processors. Yes, those are the latest and greatest processors from AMD and Intel. And Microsoft, in stark comparison, won't fully support Windows 7 or Windows 8.1 on either high-end CPU. Now, I don't really know why he felt compelled to mention that, because that's like comparing apples to oranges. On the one hand, we're talking about the latest and greatest brand new version of Ubuntu, but with Microsoft, we're talking about old versions of Windows, which Microsoft is trying to kill off in favor of Windows 10. And, we could make the same argument about Linux. Are the older Linux kernels going to fully support AMD Ryzen and Kaby Lake? So, yeah, I don't know why I even mention that. That's, like, totally irrelevant. But anyway, this Ubuntu version has replaced the Unix Linux ancient swap partition with a swap file. Okay, something radically new. And, I kind of wondered, when that was ever going to come about. Because by doing this, it's going to emulate Windows, so to speak, by having a swap file on the main file system instead of having a separate partition. So that, this is something that could make your disk setup maybe a little bit easier. But the net effect should be to make Ubuntu a bit faster in situations where the system is overburdened with applications and has to resort to using drive space in place of memory. And of course, with a swap file, I don't know exactly how they're going to do it. I don't know if they're going to have a fixed size swap file or if it's going to be a dynamically resized swap file the way Windows does it. But if it's going to be a dynamically sized swap file, I could see some advantage to that, perhaps. And the new desktop also supports the new driverless printers. These printers include IPP Everywhere and Apple AirPrint printers. So when you're using these printers over either USB or network connection, they should set up automatically. Canonical describes the process as easy as connecting a USB stick. Well, that could be good news, because with a lot of Linux distros right now, and well, actually with all your Linux distros right now, they come with the CUPS printing system, the common Unix printing system. But with that CUPS, they have a selection of printer drivers. And if you have a printer that doesn't have a driver in there with the CUPS, then you're either stuck or you got to search for a driver elsewhere. And in my case, I use Brother printers, which are, well, a Brother printer, I should say, which is several years old, and it does not have its printer driver in with the CUPS. So I have to go to the Brother website to download it and install it myself on all of my computers. So, yeah, I could see where this, if you get one of these new driverless printers, this could be a good thing. And all these are minor improvements. If you're happy with Ubuntu 16.10 or 16.04 LTS on the desktop, this new distro probably won't give you a compelling reason to upgrade, okay? Unless you're using a machine with one of the new AMD or Intel processors. So the real improvements here are in the features that are used mostly in the cloud and in servers. So we have, first of all, we have Snaps, which is Canonical's new automated way to package and deliver applications. It has more support than ever. So this is supposed to be a universal packaging mechanism. So instead of having your Pac-Man packages for Arch or your RPMs for Fedora or OpenSUSE or your deb packages for Debian and Ubuntu or whatever else, this is going to be one type of package which is supposed to work across these various different distros. I've not tried it yet. I've read some reviews of it, and it's apparently it's still kind of primitive yet, but or according to the reviews I read, but who knows? Maybe now it'll be getting better, and there'll be more packages available for it. And we also have the OpenStack Okata release, and I don't really keep up with OpenStack, that much, but, I would have to look up and see what improvements this new release will incorporate. But the general gist of it, though, is that the 1704 has all these improvements which are supposed to make it work better and faster in cloud situations as a cloud-based virtual machine or container. We have a new file system for OpenStack, improvements for LDAP integration, and so on and so forth. But the basic gist of it there, as I said, is that they are including improvements just to make it work better for cloud deployments. And down here at the bottom, we also see that we are also going to be looking at improved network performance. This will be done with the Amazon Elastic Network Adapter driver, which can give speeds up to 20 gigabits per second on AWS. And also SR-IOV support for Microsoft Azure gives Azure guests direct access to the hardware network card, giving the Ubuntu virtual machines higher throughput and lower network latency. And Ubuntu, the Ubuntu server, it's not as big in the enterprise as what Red Hat is or as even SUSE Enterprise is, but it is the #1 most deployed operating system for cloud deployments. So this is very, very important, and of course, they are trying to capitalize on that. So you might not feel compelled to switch to Ubuntu 1704 on your PC or laptop, but on the cloud, you might want to use it because network speeds, improved network speeds look really, really good. Okay? But you know what? The news about the new Ubuntu release is not the really, really big news of this month. The big news is in the bombshells that they have dropped on us. And if we go back up to the top of this ZDNet article, we see, it's been a heck of a month for Canonical, Ubuntu's Linux parent company. And the company dropped its smartphone and tablet plans, and this in turn ended its plans to make Unity its universal default interface. Instead, GNOME will become Ubuntu's once and future desktop, and that's going to happen in version 1804, which will be the long-term support, which will come out next April. And, I have mixed feelings about dropping Unity. On the one hand, I say, it's about time, because to me, Unity was like the Linux equivalent of Windows 8. And you know how everybody hated on Windows 8 because they got rid of the Start menu. And so Ubuntu with Unity did the same thing. They got rid of their Start menu and just made you have to type in everything into a search box. And then later on it came out that, hey, you type something into the search box, it goes to Amazon. And so they get your information and they try to sell you stuff. Well, that didn't go over well either, right? So Ubuntu, of course, on DistroWatch had the #1 most popular ranking for a long time, for several years. But then after they brought out Unity, it started dropping down. For a while, PC Linux OS was the most popular. And Ubuntu, I think, dropped down to like second. But now we have Mint, Debian, Manjaro all ahead of Ubuntu. But on the other hand, I also say who cares, because once they brought out the Unity interface, I quit using it. I just switched to Ubuntu, which has the LXDE interface instead. And here at Force, we have an article by Christine Hall. With all the changes happening at Canonical, you might wonder what this means for the future of desktop Ubuntu, besides the return to the GNOME desktop. Well, Mark Shuttleworth, the head guy, the owner of Canonical, has been putting a lot of his money into the company. You know, he's a millionaire. He's been basically supporting the company for a long time. Nobody knows to what effect, because it's a private company, so they don't have to release financial statements or anything like that. So nobody really knows how much of his own money that he's been putting into his company over the years, trying to keep it afloat. And of course, originally Shuttleworth was trying to promote Linux on the desktop. Back in the early days, you could just send him an email and he would send you absolutely free of charge CDs with the current version of Ubuntu. And of course, those days are now over. He no longer does that, but it's still completely free. The server version and the desktop version, you know, still completely free of charge. But unfortunately, even though he did do a lot to help popularize Linux on the desktop, more than what it was before, you know, it still hasn't really taken over the world as he had hoped. He actually filed a bug report saying that, hey, the number one bug here we got to deal with is that Windows is the number one desktop. So we gotta take care of that, right? Well, it never worked out like that. And of course, he was never able to monetize it. And by all reports, you know, the plans to make money off of the enterprise support, that hasn't really panned out quite as well as what he had hoped. Apparently, there are some, or my understanding at least from what little information is released, is that there are some divisions of Canonical that are profitable and, you know, some which aren't. And of course, the desktop is not profitable at all. But anyway, she says here, one thing's for sure, the announcements that have been coming out of the Isle of Man, you know, which is where their offices are located, for the last couple of weeks mean that Canonical has forever changed its course. It also indicates that Mark Shuttleworth has decided that it's now do or die time. You know, put up or shut up, money talks, bullcrap walks, all that. And that means from this point forward, Canonical will no longer be a company focused on the desktop. From here on out, it's enterprise all the way. And so that's probably going to work out well for enterprise users of Linux, but it doesn't really bode well down in the trenches for the users of desktop Linux. Okay? And here, Canonical desktop Linux will be job number 2, if that. I don't know. We'll get to that here in a moment. I'll comment on that more in a moment. But here in an article that she wrote for another publication, you know, she looked at the tea leaves and determined that we'll probably eventually be kissing the factory-made Ubuntu desktop we've all learned to love or hate goodbye. And at the time, I thought that eventually meant several years. And now it turns out, down here in the quote box, going forward, it appears Canonical will be more tightly focused on profitability, which in addition to job cuts will mean eliminating projects that aren't being monetized. This means that the desktop edition is probably destined to eventually be dropped, especially since users will have the numerous independently developed and officially sanctioned baby Ubuntus as options. And since those words were written a week ago, part of this has already come true. And so here, in this announcement here, there will be no longer a separate GNOME flavor of Ubuntu. The development teams from both Ubuntu GNOME and Ubuntu Desktop will be merging resources and focusing on a single combined release that provides the best of both GNOME and Ubuntu. And we are currently liaising, yeah, however you say it. We're currently liaising with the Canonical teams on how this will work out, and more details will be announced in due course as we work out the specifics. Okay, so yeah, right now there is a separate project that's one of the officially sanctioned sub-projects of Ubuntu is the GNOME version of Ubuntu. And that's been going for a while. And so now they're just going to merge with them. Basically, the two teams are going to work together somehow, and exactly how, we don't really know yet. So in other words, the developers of Ubuntu aren't simply going to switch out Unity for GNOME in Canonical's mainstream release. They're going to drop responsibility for the release in the lap of the Ubuntu GNOME's community developers and offer an as-yet-to-be-determined amount of help. And also, she says, with all the other official flavors, this means that beginning next April, Canonical will have the opportunity to distance itself from its desktop edition. Now, this isn't anything new, and she does point out here that back in 2003, Red Hat dropped its desktop distribution, which they used to sell in stores. Hey, I bought a copy. I got a copy of Red Hat version 6. I think it's up here on the bookshelf in front of me someplace. I don't see it right now, but I know it's there someplace. But they dropped their desktop distro, to crank up the Red Hat Enterprise Linux and reinvent itself as an enterprise-only company. And then it created the community desktop distro, Fedora, and the community has a say in how it's developed, even though it's owned by Red Hat. But the thing is, they're using Fedora as a testing ground for new technologies to go into Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So, yeah, even with that, they have kind of their motive there for having the Fedora. Basically, they have the motive for being able to help the company turn a profit by testing these new technologies. And SUSE was the same way. It was marketed as both a server and desktop distro until after Novell bought it, and they repurposed it as a distro developed exclusively for enterprise use, and then they offered the community desktop offshoot, which they called OpenSUSE. And OpenSUSE, more autonomous, with SUSE supplying essentials such as server use, but otherwise leaving the community developers alone. So at this point, we really don't know how things are going to work out between Ubuntu and its desktop development, and what the relationship is going to be between Ubuntu or the Canonical company and the desktop users community. We don't know yet. We'll just have to wait and see what will happen. So, and she says if there's going to be a split, we'll probably see signs of it before the end of next year. If Canonical starts to require a support contract before Ubuntu server can be downloaded, it'll be a good bet that the split between the desktop and the server is in the works. And in that case, she says Ubuntu desktop's users will be the losers, because desktop Ubuntu becomes something akin to Open Ubuntu, and it might become like Fedora is for Red Hat, something of a testing ground for Ubuntu server, or it might simply be a bone thrown to keep all the free open source software supporters at bay like OpenSUSE. I don't know. I don't know if Ubuntu desktop users are actually going to be losing out in this deal, because, I mean, you look at the way things have been over the past several years, ever since Ubuntu started coming with the Unity desktop. Okay, that's something that caused a lot of hate and discontent in the community, because a lot of people hated that Unity desktop. They hated the fact that Canonical were shoving this new Unity desktop down our throats, and they especially got incensed when they started using the Unity desktop search feature to send search results to Amazon in order to try to monetize the desktop. So, because they felt like that was a privacy issue. So with the community in charge, though, I think that we might even see, something better happen. Granted, the Canonical company has financed a lot of innovation in other ways, but on the other hand, we might even see more innovation from the community. And we won't be seeing a company anymore trying to shove stuff down our throats. So with the community in charge, I think it's more likely that the users are going to get something that we'll all be happy with. And instead of having just stuff, shoved at us, whether we want it or not. But that's my opinion. And again, time will tell. We don't really know yet. We have no way of knowing. And this, I believe, is the article that she referenced. Well, I'll take that back because this was April 14th, so this was not the one she referenced last week. But anyway, Canonical gets serious about doing enterprise right. And so what we now know is that Canonical is working overtime to attract investors. And so they're trying to orchestrate a series of events to reassure its enterprise customers and to get word to potential investors that Canonical is getting its priorities in order. And as I said before, Mark Shuttleworth has been pouring a lot of his own money into the company, and he said up front that he was going to be doing that for a while, but that eventually he did want to make the company profitable. And, I'm actually quite surprised that he's kept going at it this long. So it all started last week with Mark Shuttleworth's announcement that the company is killing Unity, which has been Ubuntu's default desktop since 2011. Development of Unity 8 is ceasing immediately. Unity 7 will no longer be the default desktop, beginning with version 18.04, which will come next April. And with the death of Unity comes the death of Ubuntu's phone and convergence efforts, which never got traction, as well as the company's go-it-alone display server, Mir. And that Shuttleworth was serious about his stated intentions to focus the company's efforts on the enterprise, particularly the cloud and the Internet of Things, was reinforced with the same-day announcement of the release of an Ubuntu kernel specifically tuned for Amazon Web Services, where Ubuntu is the most frequently deployed Linux distribution. And there was also news of massive layoffs, job cuts, yes, which included the first public disclosure that the company was seeking outside investors. And by Friday, there were rumors that CEO Jane Silber would be stepping down from her position in order to give the job back to Shuttleworth. And there's more to the article, but rather than go through it here, we'll just look at the salient points, that points out that Ubuntu is making improvements in its cloud offerings, which is the market in which it's strongest. We already looked at in the previous article. And more specifically, this includes improvements in support for various container technologies, not just Docker, but other container technologies as well. And of course, that's in addition to the networking and OpenStack improvements that we looked at in the previous article. And Ubuntu traditionally hasn't tried to directly compete with Red Hat in the enterprise market, and that isn't likely to change. But there's maybe some speculation here that Ubuntu might try to start competing kind of around the edges of the enterprise instead of going up against them directly. And also, finally, Ubuntu will focus more on security, especially in the Internet of Things market. And yeah, in the Internet of Things market, they really need to focus on security. Because right now, security with the Internet of Things is pretty abysmal. It's pretty awful. All right. So anyway, I think that pretty much covers it here for the Ubuntu news. If you like what you hear, if you like what you've seen, be sure to like and subscribe and check out the articles. I'll include the links to the articles in the description below. Also, if you're in the market for some good Linux books, I have a bookstore set up with Amazon. I am an Amazon affiliate. Click on that link to go to the Amazon bookstore. Anything you buy after clicking on that link, even if it's not a Linux book that's listed in the bookstore, it helps me out, okay? So, other than that, I think that's pretty much it. Have a great day, and see you next time.